Is this how you become YouTube famous?
Start with your catchphrase. So you gotta come in and say, "Hey guys, what's up? I'm me. You know me." And then
this is how you start with a, "Hey guys, what's up? It's me. You know me."
Then you say, "Man, I got a surprise for you guys today. I just been working on this video for so many hours." And you cut to the video.
And then I cut to the video.
And then you're like, "Look at the lions." And then you're like, "They're not here right now."
Summer road trips across America are amazing. I can't think of a better way to get a whole different perspective of the United States than by driving through it state by state. It's exhausting and captivating, boring, and also a little incomprehensible. When you drive for 3 straight days and realize you've only crossed one tiny sliver of just half of the nation, it gives you an appreciation that despite how many different lifestyles which are possible here, everybody still thinks of themselves as American. I got to take a road trip this summer, 2017, from Bentonville to Seattle. It was 3 days, 2,100 miles, and took us through Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Washington. This was my first time taking a road trip this big in that short of a time, and it was a marathon. And if you want to try to do a trip like this yourself, I've got 4 helpful tips for you. Road trip tip number 1, make sure you bring friends. This is for a number of reasons, but the obvious one is travel fatigue. It helps to have other drivers that can take shifts to make sure you don't have to stop too much or put yourself in danger by pushing yourself too far. The other reason is that any good road trip is bound to have fun stops along the way. On this trip, we got to do a few fun things. The first of which was going to the Omaha Zoo, aka the world's best zoo. But it really was pretty incredible. The exhibits are all very well designed, eliminating as many barriers between you and the animals as possible without putting anyone in danger. We had a great time, but it was so hot that we were constantly thirsty. We stopped for food and drink at a place that touted itself as serving South African cuisine. You said the peri peri sauce isn't bad? It passes the South African test?
It's close enough.
Okay.
But it could be better.
If you were a South African stranded in the United States on the wrong side of the fence, you could eat this.
Maybe.
Is that how it works? Can you really just like smack it?
Go to the Oasis. Charge you 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We'll go to the Oasis.
The drive up until Omaha was not much new to see. I've been to Kansas City a dozen times, and the Ozark landscape was one that I grew up with. But shortly after leaving the Ozarks, we entered the Great Plains. I think amber fields of grain is how the song goes, and there were no shortages of fields or grain. There was, however, a shortage of literally everything else, like buildings and people, and most of what one would acquaint with civilization. Eventually, we made it to the farmhouse we'd rented for the night. It was hosted by some of the kindest people I've ever rented with from Airbnb. They made sure we got in safely and even welcomed us with a homemade loaf of cinnamon bread that we enjoyed for the rest of the trip. But I don't think the house was ready for someone of Ewald's stature.
That's dangerous.
After our restful night in Humboldt, in South Dakota, we were back on the road again for day 2. And day 2 was where the test of mental fortitude began. This brings me to road trip tip number 2. Bring things to do to stay sane. This goes hand in hand with tip 1, as having other people around you is a great way not to lose your mind. Social pressure at least helps you act like you're not suffering from cabin fever. Before the trip, we had downloaded about a dozen podcast episodes, hours upon hours of music, and had planned out stops to take every few hours so that we could break up the potential mind-numbing effects of seeing nothing but corn and grass for 10 hours straight. One of these detours was the Great Mount Rushmore. There aren't many landmarks more American than this one, which makes it appropriate for a great American road trip. And to thank for this monumental work, one need not look further than the great sculptor Gutzon Borglum. The man, the myth, the legend. Gutzon Borglum. Yes, that's a real name. He's responsible for carving a few giant faces into rock. Not many people can claim that as their hobby. And then there was also this girl who was trying to record an Instagram video for her followers in Miami Beach, but just kept choking on the last line of the script. It's always weird to see the internet reaching into real life. A bunch of weirdos with cameras walking around recording everything. So far into the trip, I was glad at how well my car performed because it is notorious for self-destruction. And upon leaving Mount Rushmore, it had found its next way to try and die. All of its coolant had leaked out, leaving a drip trail across South Dakota, ending at Mount Rushmore. We ended up filling the coolant tank with some bottled water that we had in the trunk, and quickly made our way back to a gas station. The water had boiled off entirely by the time we got there, and so we bought 2 bottles of coolant, one to fill back up with and one to keep as a backup for the rest of the journey. And to give you just a little idea of how expansive this area was, we saw some billboards for a store called Wall Drug, and the first one we saw said, "Exit in 200 miles." 200 miles. There was a reasonable expectation that people on this highway were going to be driving at least 200 miles just to stop into a drugstore. Once we had crossed eastern Montana, we finally made it to a town called Bozeman where we spent our second night. It was a beautiful town with just a lot of spirit and a place I was very excited to visit because one of my favorite books is set in Bozeman. So seeing that place firsthand was almost unreal. It was incredible to take some time to walk around town in silence, just kind of imagining that book unfolding around me. This brings me to road trip tip number 3. Embrace shared silences. There will inevitably be long periods of silence when you're driving thousands of miles, and as someone who likes conversation, this can feel a little unnatural. But at some point, the meditative silence breaks when people begin to speak about the things that have been growing on their minds as they've stared at grass and nothingness for 3 hours. Things like people's different communication styles, how mental maps work, important moments in our lives, the airline industry, whether robots will ever rule the world. These are all topics that marinate and eventually come to the surface. Investing in that silence ends up yielding pretty good return in conversations that I don't think normally spring to mind. So finally, about the middle of the 3rd day, we left the northern end of the Rockies and entered Washington. Just past the city of Spokane, the world became flat again, which is not pictured here for your sake and mine. We drove like this for several more hours, and then suddenly we found ourselves in the Cascades. After a quick bathroom break in these gorgeous mountains, the car tried to kill itself yet again. The check engine light popped on, and we couldn't get it to go much faster than 70 miles an hour. But the sun was going down, and we were only an hour away, and like desperate cowboys, we pushed that car like our horse on its last legs, riding until we made it, or it died, whichever came first. Luckily, though, we made it. And just like that, boom. 3 days of travel that ended in an instant. It was almost unreal connecting these 2 dots of Bentonville and Seattle on the map. See, going by car is different than by plane for one important reason. With a plane, I think it's easy to get on at the airport, and then you get off at the next airport, and think of the destination as being entirely separate from the starting point. Almost like they're 2 different worlds. But with driving, you cement in your mind each mile that it took to get from where you started to where you've ended up. And to me, this makes the journey real. It connects you to your home so that even though you're 2,100 miles and 9 states away, there's this physical and mental thread tying one dot on the map to another. They say it's the journey, not the destination. This summer road trip was an amazing 3-day journey that I will remember forever. It was a good time with good buds, Which brings me to the fourth and final road trip tip. Don't ever, ever give the camera to Daniel.